All right, let's get started. Today, we'll dive deep into Mariner, Microsoft's Linux distribution. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So yeah, I just want to put this into context, right? Because I never thought I'd actually be saying those words, but a couple of years ago, I'm on Twitter like I normally do, right? Doom scrolling, and then I think a post of yours come up and went, "Hey, we've made an announcement. Come and look at our Linux distribution, right?" And I'm like, I had to double take, right? I had to look at it again and again and again, right? Because for folks that are obviously new to our industry, they don't understand the journey, right, of how far Microsoft has come towards the open source community, right? And now it's a you know a big founder. It's you know it's part of the Cloud Native Foundations in the Linux Foundation, right? It's contributing in all sorts of ways, right? So it was quite a monumental. Well, it was for me anyway, right? Growing up with Windows and it was Red Hat before it was Fedora, right, or Ubuntu, right, and now we've got this distribution, right. So I want you to
It's
introduce
been an
yourself.
interesting journey, yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait to delve into this, right? By the way, I've got like so many like fanboy questions, but yeah, I'm glad you're on the show. But I think for context, I think it'd be great if you could just talk briefly about your career, where you've come from, and how you've ended up at Microsoft, and then we'll dive into the Mariner piece.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jim Perrin for the folks who don't know me. I've been building Linux distributions now for, I want to say, close to 20 years, which is probably longer than I should actually admit to, because God, I'm old. Um, yeah, before I came to Microsoft, I was working for Red Hat. I was part of the CentOS distribution, ran the engineering team there for a little bit, and have been working with Linux basically for my entire career in computing. So it's been kind of a fun journey. And I want to say about 3 years ago, Microsoft called with an offer and was basically saying, "Hey, we want to build a Linux distro. You were referred to us. Do you want to come help?" And how often do you hear the words like Microsoft builds a Linux distro and like, "We want you to help with this"? I couldn't really turn that one down. It sounded like fun.
That sounds like an amazing phone. I mean, you must have been like, "This is a prank call, right? Like, what's going on here, right?" These guys make the most widely used operating system in the world, right? From a client point of view, but as we know, right, with the cloud, and we've seen a transition, and I would say from like 2014 onwards, right, with the whole open source skill sets, right, that have applied to all clouds. Doesn't matter, if you're using other
Mhm.
cloud providers, but in Azure, right? And we've had a lot of conversations about Kubernetes on this show, right? And we'll get into that down the road. But yeah, that must have been like you must have come off that call going, you know, Microsoft want me to build them a Linux distribution. Like,
Oh,
what
I
was
I
going through your head?
started I
Yeah.
started off my Linux career like in the old days of, anti-Microsoft, Linux is cancer, blah, blah, blah. That quote for me starting off my career was kind of foundational. And it was always like, all right, what do we need to do? Like, how do we take the beast down? Blah, blah, blah. And fast forward, 20 years, that quote is old enough to drink. The company has gotten a couple of, new leaders in the time, and the entire attitude is shifted now. You've got Microsoft releasing VS Code, you've got a bunch of other open source things going on. The Linux distro was the interesting piece because from a kind of Linux community perspective and one of, if I can call myself old in this context, one of the old guard in that style, why we could either continue to be mad about something that isn't relevant or really true anymore, or we can help them change. And if you get an opportunity to come in and build a distro, why wouldn't you? So coming in to help kind of shape what it needs to look like, how it gets put together, what the use cases are, and just implementing kind of that corporate change. That to me was the opportunity, and that was what was exciting. And it made it a little more interesting because the phone call that I got was basically I want to say like the tail end of March in 2020. Everything was just beginning to look like maybe there was going to be a lockdown. The companies were beginning to tighten budgets. I had been in discussion back and forth with them for a couple of different ideas or topics, and most of the discussions with Microsoft at that point kind of ended in, well, we're fairly Redmond focused, so we'd want you to come up to the Seattle area. And that usually caused the discussion to kind of trail off and end. I'm happy in Portland. I like what I'm doing. That phone call, or that last phone call, was everybody's working from home now. We're willing to give this a shot. We are taking this seriously. We have to extend you an offer today because everything closes tomorrow. So if you're doing this, now's the time. This is the best offer we can make. There isn't any negotiating for it. We got to get this closed. Sign here as quickly as you can. And like, you know what? All right, let's jump. Let's do it. Let's see what it looks like. And it's been a hell of a journey for the last 3 years.
Yeah, I can relate to that process, right? Obviously, I wouldn't say what I'm doing is probably as pivotal as what you've done, right? And we talk about the history of stuff and all that, but yeah, when that offer comes through, right, you have to double take, right? You have to take a look at it, the company, everything, right? And it's an exciting ride. You're never bored, Jim. I think that's fair to say, right? When you join Microsoft, right? So it's a busy place. But I just want to touch on. So you came in because I want to know. You might not be able to talk about this, obviously, right? But why? Why did Microsoft want a distro? What was some of the user cases around it? And you don't have to talk about maybe some of the stuff that's doing in the back end, right? The public facing stuff, right?
Yeah, honestly, my leadership has been really supportive of the whole upstream first kind of development model. That was something I was particular about coming in for. If we're going to build a Linux distribution, we're going to do this right. Everything in the core distribution itself needs to be open source. Like, that is just non-negotiable. We're going to do the development publicly, and we do that. Everything is in GitHub. We do the development, the package uplift, everything happens there. So that's one of the things that I'm really kind of happy about. But the broad use case for it, just in general terms, is the whole concept of paved path. Like, this isn't trade secret. This isn't anything kind of fancy. This is individual teams were to some extent defining what they were doing. Some teams were picking Ubuntu, some teams were doing other things. And those decisions made sense for that individual team, but organic growth like that, once you pass a certain point, starts providing more hindrance than forward momentum. And so you need to create a road. You need to give that easy on-ramp for other teams so that you can keep growing, so that the company has a standardized model for reporting, or saying, hey, we've done this thing, or rolling out new features. If we're using multiple distributions and trying to integrate various features across Azure, we have to go work with each of those distributions to get those features integrated. And not everybody does their development on the same time. Not saying we shouldn't do that, not saying we don't need to continue working with those partners. We absolutely do. But if we're pushing, a new feature, landlock in the kernel or something along those lines, if we're the ones with the distribution, we're committing that feature. We know when it's production ready, we can roll that out on our schedule, test it across all of our features while we're working with other distributions to get those features integrated there, so that, customers on the outside running whatever can get their benefit. It's simply for us to get standardized and move kind of faster feature velocity, easier testing, simplified release processes internally. That's the entire point behind it.
So from what I'm hearing, and I probably get shut down in the comments of this, with Linux, it's a gift and a curse, right? There's so many distributions out there, right? And people wake up on a Monday morning and go, hey, I'm going to write a Linux distribution, right? And sometimes in the corporate world, right, and especially with our own cloud, we needed some sort of framework, right? You know, like you said, not working with like the partners like Ubuntu, right, or Red Hat and all those good folks. But it's if we had our own distribution, then we can align it to the features and the functionality, right? And also, if I was like a bank or someone like that, right, I can actually say I've got a supported type with a framework, and there's consistency there, right? Or there's like you said, the timelines are there, right, for me to work and develop for, right? So
even from an internal like compliance and process perspective, the idea of building our own distribution, like we're already an operating systems company. Microsoft has had Windows for decades. This is just another iteration of building an operating system. There are some fundamental differences between, building an open source distro, building Windows. That's fine. If we hand wave those away, we're just building another platform for people to layer on top of. This is something that we're already doing. We already understand the fundamentals, and we have the kind of secure supply chain reporting perspective for our own internals, where we know exactly what the component is, where we got the source for it. We can trace all of this. We know the process for how it's built, which is something we don't necessarily have visibility on for using external distributions. We get to, pick and choose and say, this one performs slightly better. We need to go with this version for this reason. Here's what, we're going to feature freeze on this one particular thing while we do this development. It gives us an immense amount of flexibility. And I wouldn't necessarily say this is something every company needs to do. Like, this really kind of only works at certain scales, but we're one of those companies at that scale where it makes sense to do this.
okay, it's cool. I have seen folks try and install this. Is there a graphical user interface? I haven't personally. I stick to the CLI, right? Like, that's how far I've gone. Like, if the younger me could see me now, right? But it's like, yeah, I've even seen people try to use it, right, out in the wild, right, as a desktop kind of thing. But
very, very definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
We're staying away from the desktop kind of aspect to it. The focus for Microsoft is basically what we're doing for server operations. So we're looking
Right.
at container use cases. We're looking at VMs powering services. We're looking at, the AKS container host. And running Mariner as a worker node there. That's the sort of use case. So we're not building GNOME, we're not building KDE, or trying to target a desktop or anything on top of that. That's really not the use case we're going after. And the more dependencies that get built into the system like that, the more, I don't want to say bloat, because that's the wrong word, but we don't want to carry those additional packages or those additional feature options. We want to keep kind of streamlined to the use cases we're targeting. And that shows up for us in the fact that, a bare install, I think the VMs that we provision, the actually consumed disk amount is something like 340 megs or 400 megs for the image, just for the bare use case. And most other distributions, they're a little larger, they're a little heavier, they've got more kind of installed by default, but we want that minimal framework. We only want to ship what people need to power services, and that's it.
I'm glad you clarified that, right? Because if we think back to Windows as well, right, and we look at server core, right, for Windows Server, it's the same kind of like approach. It's like, actually, this is for back-end services, or this is for container. We just want to give you enough to get you going, and then you can install your own dependencies, right, for whatever the workload may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the main objective, right? Cool. Was the distro built ground up, or did you look for inspiration elsewhere? I'm only saying this, right, because this is what happens everywhere, right? So I'm just
stand
curious.
on the shoulders of giants. Now, we definitely borrowed spec files and codes. Mariner's an RPM based distribution. We've gone down the RPM route. that starts a whole fun packaging war discussion. Should it be deb based? Should it be RPM based? Is the default editor Emacs? Is the default editor Vim? Like, there's all sorts of
The war goes
little,
on,
like,
right? Yeah.
oh God, always. But fundamentally, we wrote Mariner kind of from the ground up, but we looked at other RPM based distributions. We looked at RHEL, we looked at CentOS, we looked at Fedora, and where it made sense, we borrowed spec files from them in order to kind of get spun up faster. The idea
Right.
wasn't to clone them or anything else. It was basically, we know this works, we know this is consistent. Rather than write this all out ourselves and start from just pure ground zero, why not leverage open source? We're pushing this is as open ourselves. And even in the GitHub release announcement, when we pushed our 1.0 release, we thanked the CentOS project, the Fedora project, like, hey, we borrowed your code for this. Thank you for making it available. Here's the modifications that we have. Everything we're doing is right here in GitHub.
Okay, cool. In terms of, if we talk about user cases, like for me, the first time I sort of knew about it was one of your tweets, but the second one was I saw it creeping into AKS like that, right? Just like just coming over the mountain, coming over the hill. But then when we were sending tweets out about this, somebody actually went, actually, I thought you could use this in IoT, right? So I didn't realize that potentially could be the case, right? There was a use case for that. Where are you seeing it being used, right? From a, I don't know if there are top 5 common scenarios where Marin is being used. So like we know AKS is one, but is there any other areas where it might be being used that people spinning up?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
So the fundamental behind Mariner isn't necessarily to build the distribution itself. We're looking at creating kind of I want to call it almost a factory floor type thing.
Right.
If we look at some of the project plan books, we go to Deming or some of the other folks, that's kind of what we're looking to build. And so it's effectively Lego pieces stacked on top now. So Mariner has the core distribution that is fundamentally very small. That can go on some IoT devices, but we're mostly looking at heavy edge, and that helps us provide consistency across the various platforms. So if you look at something AKS HCI, some of the Azure Stack Edge products, some
Right.
of those have Mariner baked into them. That is the container host running on top of those platforms. If you look at WSL, the graphical interface in Windows 11, WSLG, that is powered by Mariner under the hood. The system distribution there is Mariner based. For public usage, we are pushing Mariner as an AKS container host. That's something that's available in preview now. There's directions up on the AKS website. Like, people can go try it, play around with it. But we've also seen a lot of interest, Twitter, a few other folks, for people basically taking the packages that we had put out, spinning it around themselves and running it as a full customer facing distribution for WSL, people running it in their own, Hyper-V instances, grabbing the ISO and spinning it up. And that's just cool to see. It's not necessarily the primary use case that we were envisioning for some of the stuff that they're doing, but it's open source. Take it, use it, go nuts. If you find something, submit a pull request. We're happy to look.
I was going to ask about WSL. I've been a fan of WSL for, it was like the best of both worlds, right? For me, I was able to do all my development, right? Because I'm a fan of Bash. I've had more success with my tools, right? And I've showed on the show like many times, I'm able to do pretty much everything I can want to do with Azure inside of WSL. But like, yeah, when you go through the distribution list, right, from the marketplace, I didn't see Mariner on there, so I'm gonna have to try and Google that afterwards, right, or Bing it, right? Should I say, like, where can I try find how to put Mariner, right?
This is where I need to be very careful about like how we talk about stuff, because we're the march to getting Mariner out is very definitely a phased approach.
Right.
So
Okay.
inside Microsoft, it is available for service use there as a VM. You can find it, you can play around with it. That's no big deal. We don't want customers paying like Azure customers thinking it is a supported product. So it is not visible in the Azure portal. You can't go
Right.
search for it in the marketplace, stuff like that. So from that aspect, we're drawing kind of a dividing line. If you want to take the ISO or take the toolkit or anything that's on GitHub and you want to make your own version and upload that into Azure, great. That's all you. That workflow kind of leads people to believe just under the assumption that it's not necessarily a supported thing. We may get there eventually, but right now we're starting the customer supported version with AKS. We're choosing that kind of narrowly defined use case and starting there. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the customers think of it. We'll get that community response. We'll get that customer response, and then we'll adjust course of action from that point on.
I'm glad you brought clarity to that, right? Because that's a thing, right? With people in tech as well. They're like, oh, I'll get something and make it do something that it wasn't intended to do, right? So I think Paco just asked the question, can I start spinning up servers, right, in Azure with the Mariner base install, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, you can, but it's not supported. It's like bringing your own image kind of thing, right? I take it. So there's check your corners, Paco. That's probably what I'm trying to say, right? Make sure that it's whatever you're trying to do is a supported and secure method, right? Just want to advocate that.
I mean, the intent for what we're doing is very intentional, very deliberate. We're trying to take a phased approach to make sure we're doing this the right way. Getting Microsoft to release a Linux distribution, the last thing I want to do is screw this up. Like, we have to have the quality nailed. We have to have the customer experience nailed. Our history will not allow us to, make mistakes in that regard. We don't get the benefit of the doubt. We don't get any of that. So we want to make sure that as we're doing it, we're very careful and we're nailing every step of the way.
Awesome.
Yeah, makes sense, right? I want to zoom in a little bit on AKS.
Yeah, please.
Because I saw that it was I need to turn my audio a little bit down. Better. No, so I saw there was a preview, the preview feature for AKS. I saw that when I was researching Mariner. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And before we went live, I asked you, like, is that going to be including a read-only read-only file system?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the reason why I asked that, because I know that one of the other cloud providers have something that's called Container Optimized OS.
Yep.
And that's powering their managed Kubernetes offering, which is a read-only file system as well. So you can already take that out of your hardening things to do, basically, because your worker nodes are read-only. They're only designed to spin up containers, and then you can take it from there. So I'm already blew up my question, because I know that is on the roadmap. But is the roadmap, is that publicly available?
The roadmap is not currently publicly available. That is something, it's not that there's anything in it that we're trying to hide or anything like that. I just haven't gotten the team to kind of write down what we're doing and put it out there available on GitHub. We keep looking at it as, yeah, we need to do this. We want to show people what's coming next, what we're doing. Here's the next 6 months of development. Here's the next year of development. But mostly we've been busy, and I just haven't prioritized, writing the document down. So blame me for that. I need to take a weekend or whatever, and like, fine, we'll just do the markdown file. We'll put this up in GitHub. Like, here's the README. This is what we're doing. I swear we have plans for this.
Sweet.
So yeah, it's definitely there. The read-only file system is something that we're looking around. We're evaluating on our side. That requires some kind of cross-team development to support that, but it is beginning to get to be the standard. You're right. A couple of the other clouds have something similar offered. The read-only container host has kind of been around as a concept for a while, and it's absolutely worth implementing, and it's one of the things that we will get to.
Sweet. Nice. Did I understand correctly that, okay, this is a phased approach, right? You don't
Yeah.
want to screw this up.
Yep.
For a lot of good reasons. So eventually it will become available on VMs. So I can just go down into Azure, say create VM, and I'll just select the Mariner OS and then spin up a VM.
So possibly, and this is where as part of that phased approach, we're stopping, we're getting customer feedback, we're seeing what the response is, what the reactions are, and what the customers want. So basically, here's your phase gate or your checkpoint. Get to this milestone, stop, test, see what people are doing, see what the response is, see what the customer feedback and customer demand is. Use that, calibrate the next approach for where you're going. Like I have plans for, yes, let's conquer the world with this. Here's world domination, but every product manager has that for every product ever.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I'm unique in that regard.
every product's important, right? Everything wants to go big or go home, right? Kind of thing. But so it sounds like the concentration's on AKS, right, at the moment. Would that be fair to say? Or
for right now, yes. That was that launch is the easiest to kind of define and bound. The Kubernetes workflow, like the container host space, is pretty constrained. It's easy to start there and then look at, okay, for maybe we do base containers next, or we start looking at partnering with other Microsoft teams for, hey, .NET folks, what happens if you release a Mariner based container there, and then you can have the container host and the container on top of it, all based on the same platform? Is this a thing we're interested in, pushing for supply chain security concerns and customers who are interested in that? Like what is the next step? And that is something where each area has, a specific workflow to it that we're defining, but we need to figure out what the customer demand is and which one is, the priority based on customer demand. So that's kind of how we're judging. We're starting here. We're going to listen. We're going to talk to the customers. We're going to talk to the community. We're going to see what needs to happen. And then based on that feedback, we'll make a decision between, do we go this way? Do we go this way?
Cool. I mean, so you talked about the developer experience there, right? Which is really important to Microsoft, right? If we think about we've done a lot of work in that whole ecosystem over the past 10, 12 years, right? Like they've nailed VS Code, right? The extensions, the integration and everything else. So that's where I think from what you were just saying there, that's like sort of the next stages of how do we get people on board, or are people, like you said, wanting a demand for from start to finish, they're using Mariner through the life cycle, right? As their as the platform, right? To ultimately deploying their application in Azure. Is there any other features that are coming out with AKS that you can talk about, or anything else regarding Mariner that's coming over the horizon? I like to ask this question because a few weeks ago we had another product manager on, and I asked him this question right at the end, and it was the best thing he talked about, right? And we had like 5 minutes to go, right? So I thought I'd talk about it now before I let Robin ask some questions. But yeah, is there anything on the horizon and the intermediate future? Is there any releases coming up? Anything you can talk about?
Trying to think if there's anything specifically for like upcoming stuff. There are a few things that we have in the mix. What I would say basically for AKS and for Mariner, Microsoft has a conference coming up like end of May-ish, small thing that we put on called Build. Maybe people should pay attention to that. Maybe the AKS folks will have an announcement. Maybe we'll talk about something. Like you gotta, I'm not going to ruin anybody's weekend or steal thunder for release announcements. Come on.
Okay. So get registered for Build, I think is the is the takeaway from that last statement, right? So
I'll put on the corporate hat and be like, yes, stay tuned for more. Register for build.
Robin, have you got any?
I would point people like, if you want to see what we're doing for Mariner, follow the GitHub repository. Like, everything is happening there. We've got the branch developments for 2.0 for the releases. You can watch the features go in. That's kind of where we're focused. The AKS team, we're collaborating with them on some stuff. But I'm not gonna steal anybody's release thunder or anything like that.
That makes sense. Makes sense. I was reading about it, and it seems to be powering AKS Edge as well.
Yes, yeah. There are a couple of different Edge product lines that all use Mariner as a container host or as a platform. There's a couple of telco offerings. I want to say Azure Nexus something or other that was announced at Mobile World Congress. That uses Mariner. So there's a lot of different things that kind of will be coming out. We're basically like, it's going to be the standard platform for Microsoft flavored things. So that shouldn't really surprise anybody that as we're doing more Linux powered services, they'll probably come out powered by Mariner in some fashion.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. It also shows confidence as well, right? Because it's like eating your own dog food kind of thing as well. If we're using it, right, it means people look at it, right? Like, it goes back to that stability.
The big aspect that I like about that is it is a consistent operational framework at that point. So if a customer's used to, Azure something in the cloud, they'll get the exact same experience for that edge device. It's all the same stuff underneath. It's a kind of consistent, seamless experience the whole way through. So it doesn't matter if it's edge, if it's cloud, whatever. Here's your consistent platform. That's one of the things I like about it.
Cool. So we mentioned the GitHub repo. Go and click on the notification icon in there, right? That's how I stay on top of all of, because there's like 500 repos that I'm subscribed to, right? Obviously, but yeah, go in there. That's a great place. Is there again, folks could try and follow you on Twitter. Sometimes you tweet some snippets of gold on there, Jim, right? Like,
if they follow me on Twitter, that's going to be a weird mix of what they might get. It could be a picture of the dog. It could be, me snarking at somebody and exposing a pretty dark sense of humor, or it could be something work related. So yeah, follow me on Twitter, but be careful what you wish for. I mean, you're going to get some weird stuff in there.
It's all right because they follow me and Robin as well, right? So they should be used to that, right? But yeah, I mean, Robin, have you got anything you'd like? Because I feel like I've been asking all the questions, right? Like a proper fanboy here, but
so I do have a question about using Mariner as your base container image. Is that something that's something folks should do?
That is something that we are asking internal teams to do. The .NET folks have been great partners in this. They've been building on Mariner for a while and kind of pushing that into their GitHub repository as well. It is not yet something we're supporting for customer or paying workloads. So the containers are there. We're basically just showing people and being as transparent as we can. Hey, here is what Microsoft is doing with Linux. We are using this to power our internal stuff. We're making it available for other people too, but only for certain supported use cases. And like I said, we might decide in the future that the container base image is the right next step. Maybe it's partnering with some of the other internal teams like .NET or the MS Open JDK team or some of the other product teams and just saying, look, here's your standard base layer, come on in. And then it's a pure Microsoft, single vendor solution for that end-to-end workflow. That seems like a viable approach.
Okay.
Nice.
So it sounds like, again, it goes back to that you can, but it's not supported at the moment, right? Until we've people are more comfortable internally, right? By the sounds of things, yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of dog fooding it and having the internal teams run it. There's a little bit of basically just support mechanics, because from a large company aspect, there's a difference between, hey, I'm running this thing as an open source model, use this, have fun with it, play around, and hey, this bank is using this thing and one of their admins had a question at 2 a.m. Who do they talk to about it? So, we got to balance and what support is ready to handle, what sort of user volume are we looking at. There's a whole mess of different things like that. It doesn't change the reliability of the container. I'm using it at home myself for a lot of the stuff. It's just what the company is able to support through the various support pipelines, things like that. So I'm not going to say don't use it. I'm not going to say go use it and then have, customers call angry and like, but you said this was supported. Like, you can use it. I trust it. I use it myself. It's not yet a supported product. That's kind of the line to draw on it.
While you're saying that, I'm thinking about when is the last time I reached out to, Conical, or probably pronounced that in the wrong way, or Red Hat about, hey, I'm trying to get this container up and running and it's not working, right? So I know there are customers paying for premium support, Azure related or other products that they pay for support. So they maybe expect that it's supported or that they can, reach out to someone when something's not working. But no, last time I did that for an OS is like never, probably. Right. So if it's working, yeah, I got one walking around here as well. So
Yep. I'm trying to, not have him bark directly on the audio, but hey, whatever. It's a live podcast.
It's cool. Dogs are welcome, right? Other product managers have brought dogs in the past as well. Don't worry about it.
Oh, it's the beauty of live streaming, right? So, but okay. So if summarize what you're saying is it's ready to use. I'm not actively going to, incentivize people to use it, but it's there. It's ready. It's stable. I'm using it.
And a lot of times support isn't even, is this, hey, there's a problem with this thing. Sometimes support calls are, your customer calls up and says, hey, this other vendor that we have an arrangement with tells me I need this version of this application. You ship this different version. How can we make this work? Do we need to up level? Does the vendor need to up level? Do we need an ISV arrangement with the vendor to say that it's supported cross-platform and cross company, and then we go live? So support is a number of different things. There's a whole bunch of stuff that factors in.
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point to sort of mention there, because like that's the first thing you think of, right? I'm contacting support because the drivers aren't working, or it's not working in the right way, right? But actually, it could be that you have a workload that's certified to work on XYZ operating system, right? And that's where it goes out the window. But back to Robin's point, yeah, I mean, I can't remember the last time I would like go to Red Hat, right, or something like that. I don't think I've ever ran an enterprise workload at that scale, and if I did, it would have been through the marketplace and whatever, right? There's always an agreement wrapped around this, right? So
yeah,
it's a bit like any other open source operating system, right? Where it's you're gonna find the information yourself, and that leads me on to my next question. So if we talk about, this is where you might say, well, this is the whole support piece, updating the distribution, the kind of basic mechanics, right? If the security updates, that kind of thing, right? Is that handled in this distribution, or is it just more of a, we release a new version, and because it's supposed to work in a container, you release the latest version of the container instance, right? Well, what kind of mechanism is around that?
It depends on how you are using it. Like I said, Mariner's basically, we're designing it to be kind of a modular thing. most distributions have a concept of packaging and kind of Lego
Yeah.
assembly for stack things on top. That's not new or groundbreaking. So how the updates happen depends on the use case. So for a container host use case like an AKS, you can either do package updates or you can do full node image update. Both options are available. For containers, it depends on, if you're using one of the distroless variants that we've got, those there isn't a package manager in them. Most everything else is stripped out. So that has to be a full container image. We update our images on kind of a monthly cadence. So not quite Patch Tuesday, but kind of along those lines, like roughly first of the month, there's a new release that comes out, or first week of the month, there's a new release that comes out. So you'll be able to pick up, a full updated set of containers. Then if there are CVEs, that's where the support aspect gets interesting. And that we do kind of out of band. If there's a critical CVE, we have a set SLA to our teams to get those patched and get new versions out, or new containers based on that version out. If there's a high, we take maybe a little bit longer. If it's a low severity CV, we're not going to force anybody to update that one. That one's a wait for the monthly release kind of thing.
I think it was important to clarify that, because that was like rattling through the back of my head, right? Even though, security, as an organization, we're very big on security, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like, even though we're giving out something for free and it's open source, it's the contribution factor, right? It's the maintenance of it, right? Kind of thing. So
it's give and take, because most of the code that we're building into the distribution, actually 90% of the code that's in the distribution, isn't something that came from Microsoft. That's something that we're getting from upstream. But we are also working with the upstream communities, the Grub folks, some of the secure boot work we've done there. We are engaging with the various upstreams that make sense for us to contribute to and to help with, so that we are not just consuming and saying, hey, thanks for the free code or anything like that. We want to be good open source citizens. We are giving patches back.
I couldn't imagine where the folks at Grub one day, right, get an email or a call from Microsoft saying, hey, do you want us to help you with your bootloader? Right? Just like, it must have been a surreal engagement, right? Again, it's emphasizing on like the journey that we've come on, Jim, right? I think, it's credit to Microsoft, right, and its approach. The reflection and changing the path, right, is it can only be a good thing, right? And we touched about that earlier in the conversation. It's just
we're certainly trying to. Yeah, there's definitely kind of a cultural shift, and it was interesting coming into Microsoft too. I wasn't really sure what to expect. My old team at Red Hat, when I told them where I was going, everybody kind of stopped and looked at me like, what the hell? And I got here, and there are a lot of, very engaged, very passionate, diehard Linux engineers inside Microsoft. And I was not expecting that. There's an entire internal community just devoted to, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's this thing, here's how this works. It was just shocking to me to come in. All the kind of preconceived notions that I had for like, oh, Microsoft and Linux. No, it was an entirely new thing. I have to say thank you to Jose Miguel, who was one of the people, like when I came in, he wasn't on the immediate team, but he was one of the people basically kind of helping me onboard into the company and making these introductions. It was phenomenal. And just the reach that Linux has across the company has been great to see.
I've noticed that myself as well. And like, even my own team, like when I demonstrate something or I do something and I'm doing it right with open source tools or Linux, they're like, they can't get their head around it at first, right? They're like traditional Windows folks, and they're like, yeah, you can pretty much do everything. I could pretty much do 98% of my job, right, using our open source tools, right, and our approach to our cloud. So I just
Don't
think
say
we've come
that.
a
That
long
means
way.
my job is done. I still got more work to do.
I didn't mean the back end, Jim. You've still got lots of work to do there, right? But like when we go back to the developer experience, right? You know, I use Windows, right? I have WSL, but I also use outside of work, I use like Fedora, and I'm deploying everything right through Microsoft tools. So just think it's come a long way. That's what I'm trying to emphasize there. But yeah.
Yeah, the Mariner side has been great. We've got the larger team that I am part of, Linux Systems Group, also deals with other external distributions on Azure. I got to give them a little bit of credit too.
Sure.
Jack
Yeah.
Senthil, a few of the other folks on that team, for the things that they are doing as far as vendor relationships with Canonical, with Red Hat, trying to get more of the community flavored distributions into Azure. Like there's a lot that we are looking to push, just kind of broader Linux apart from what we're building for our own platform.
I think it's great that you mentioned that as well, right? Like the bigger picture, because without, for those vendors, right? We wouldn't have had the momentum that we've had now, right?
We want to give the customers as many options as, if there is a demand, let's fill it.
Awesome.
I'm browsing through the specs list of the 2.0 version, and I see a lot of interesting
all
tools.
like 6,000 packages.
Yeah.
There's a bunch. We got to the point GitHub is yelling at us like, no, you got to clone this repository because we're not listing all of the things in this directory anymore.
GitHub is
GitHub's like, seriously, there's more than 1,500 things in here. Like you're cut off. We'll get to 1,500. After that, clone the repo and look yourself.
Oh. There are a lot of interesting prepackaged. What's the right terminology? Right? I don't want to mess up anything. Specs are your.
The spec file is basically just a recipe for how to build the software. It's the same thing that Fedora uses, the same thing that Red Hat uses for RHEL. It's basically just the compilation script and metadata around, here's the name of the package, the description, the version number, the build requirements, stuff like that. And it's basically all the data around that the build system needs. And so we run that through our tooling, similar to what Red Hat does with, Koji is their build system, or Fedora does as Koji for their build system. And it spits out the binary package, and all the packages for Mariner are hosted on packages.microsoft.com.
Oh, it says at the top of the list, sorry, we had to truncate this directory to 1,000 files.
Yep.
345 entries were omitted from the list. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Interesting. But I see Flux, I see FluentBit, I see the Cloud Init, AZ Copy. I am missing the AC CLI. Is that right?
Yeah, I use the Azure CLI in Bash all the time, right? Yeah, it's
yeah, but is that prepackaged? I don't know.
I don't think we're shipping that directly in our Mariner release, but we are working with that team. And I know there's a couple of different packages that are available for it. So maybe that's something that ends up as a container in the future. For me, one of the interesting things within the Azure portal, you click on the Cloud Shell icon and you're using that. Cloud Shell is all powered by Mariner. That's a Mariner-based container in there.
Right, I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
Sweet. And did I understand that correctly? There is no package manager, so I cannot do apt or something like that.
For the distroless containers, there's no package manager. For the distroless container, the concept there is basically only have the bare minimum number of libraries, files, things like that needed to run a specific workload. So you don't need a package manager if you're doing that type of thing. We've stripped all that out. If you're using one of the the heavier, just regular base containers or build containers, then it's the same DNF, TDNF kind of package manager that people would be used to on the Red Hat or the Fedora side.
All right, and this distroless means that there is no way to shell into your container or into your system.
Yeah,
right?
distroless is like we've got a couple of files from OpenSSL. There's a few pieces of glibc in here, just enough to get the system, just enough to get that container functional enough to run, a Golang binary or a something else. It is very, very lightweight.
Yeah, and stripping a lot of possible vulnerabilities, libraries that are unnecessary, and things like that. So
Yeah, that's the basic concept for it. We're actually seeing a decent amount of interest in the distroless side of the house internally, and making that easier to build against, via multi-stage containers and tooling, things around that. That's one of the focuses for the next, probably few months of development at least.
that's interesting, because I'm preparing myself for the CKS certification, and one of the things is securing your supply chain and hardening your containers, and that starts with a distroless container image, because then you already, if it's not there, it cannot be used against you, right?
Yep.
So awesome.
And that's part of the thinking behind, the minimal set of the house for the VMs and the container host set as well. The container host, we're stripping as much out of that as we can and still providing a good experience for the customers. The whole thing is basically, the smaller the footprint, the less time it takes to transmit, update data, the less time it takes for various other things to happen, the less potential vulnerability exposure you might have, because Vim has something, Perl has something, whatever. If it's not there, it's not an exploit.
Yeah. So
It's just like a what was try like it's like a triangle, right? Like there's performance C efficiencies, you're reducing the attack surface, like you said, right? If you start incorporating other dependencies, you've got to wait on their release cycle, right, to keep up with security updates or vulnerabilities, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah, but the minimal concept has been around for a while. I mean, CentOS
Yeah.
had a minimal install and minimal install ISO, stuff like that. Like we're not kind of coming out with groundbreaking new concepts here. We're just being really strict and intentional about what we're developing, what the focus is, what the use case is, and that seems to be paying off for us fairly well. I'm kind of happy with it.
Sweet.
Cool.
I'm definitely going to check it out and play around with it. My interest is peaked. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna try and jimmy it in to some things, basically. Right. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Of exploring it as well, right? It's we speak to a lot of the community, right? And it's like, what skills do I need, right? For being a cloud engineer, right, or an architect. And we're always pushing like, you need Linux skills. So this is another, lab environment, right, at home. Go and try and make this work, right? Because it'll be a learning experience, right, at the end of the day. So
you say lab environment at home, and I have to thank my wife for being tolerant enough to allow, like, I have a rack in the basement with just filled with servers, and she's very accepting, and thank you. Only tiny expenses.
I was about to say, right, that and the utilities bill. So
doesn't everybody have their own like 22U rack full of Kubernetes clusters at home? Come on.
Don't get Robin. He'll do it. Robin will do it, right? So
oh man, no, we have a shortage of space now. We need to move out somewhere else, but the housing market is not that interesting at this point. So we're kind of stuck. So my partner works from the living room when she works from home. She was like, "Why can I not use your room?" Well, that's my office. I'm sitting here all the time, so I can probably sneak in a rack, a rack of two. But no, it's maybe when I have a basement, I can do stuff like that.
One of these days.
One of these days, yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
Let's get this wrapped. I think it's been an
it.
amazing session. But yeah, I want to thank Jim for coming on to the show. Again, like, I've learned stuff. I think it's been great that you've been able to talk about Mariner, but you've also talked about like the bigger strategy at Microsoft as well from the Linux group internally, right? About which directions we're going to, what stuff might be coming up on the horizon. I think the key takeaway was register for build. Right, there might be something in there that we might want to keep our eyes on. But yeah. Anything else, Robin?
No, I'm really impressed with where this is going and the work that Jim and his team are doing. And it's that I'm really interested in to see where this is going. Right, I'm looking forward to the GA announcement for AKS, so I can, I don't have to jump to a couple of hoops to get it working. So it's already looking at the instructions. I'm like, well, can I just select this as iOS and then it just works? Well, it's not there yet.
Got to get that preview plug in for AK for Azure CLI right now.
Yeah, but it's definitely something I'm going to play around with. I'm going to try to bake some containers using Mariner. So yeah, I'll be sharing that. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for having me on the show. This has been great.
No, thanks, Jim. Just before we go, again, if you like what me and Robin are doing, don't forget to like and subscribe, right? And reach out to us, right, in the community. But thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care. Don't be a stranger. Bye.